August 8th, 1918, 4:20 in the morning. Amiens, France. A milk cart rattles down a cobblestone street in the French town of Amiens. ****. The driver, an elderly man named Henri Dubois, guides his mare through the pre-dawn fog, thinking of breakfast, of the price of oats, of his daughter in Lyon. The Western Front lies 8 kilometers to the east. He has lived with the sound of distant guns for so long that silence would seem strange. But this morning, the world holds its breath. In exactly 15 minutes, 2,000 Allied artillery pieces will open fire simultaneously along a 20-kilometer front, and the German army, undefeated in the field for 4 years, will begin to die. Henri Dubois does not know this. The German sentries shivering in their forward positions do not know this. Even many of the Allied soldiers crouching in assembly trenches, checking their rifles one final time, do not fully understand what is about to happen. They are about to witness something the Great War has never seen. A perfectly orchestrated offensive that will shatter an entire army group in a single day, break the will of the German High Command, and set in motion 100 days of relentless advance that will end the most catastrophic conflict in human history. General Erich Ludendorff, the man who has directed Germany's war effort for 2 years, will later call August 8th, 1918, the Black Day of the German army in the history of this war. He will mean it as military assessment. He will mean it as epitaph. The milk cart disappears around a corner. The fog thickens. The clock ticks toward 4:35. 7 weeks earlier, on June 15th, 1918, a German staff officer named Captain Wilhelm Müller sat in a captured French farmhouse near Château Thierry, writing a letter to his wife in Stuttgart. Outside, the latest German offensive had ground to a halt against American and French resistance. Inside, Müller sipped ersatz coffee and allowed himself a moment of cautious optimism. "We have come so far since March," he wrote, his handwriting neat despite fatigue. "Paris itself lies within range of our artillery. The French are exhausted. The British are depleted. Yes, the Americans arrive in increasing numbers, but they are raw troops, enthusiastic children who know nothing of this war. We need only hold what we have gained until autumn, when surely the Allies must see reason and negotiate. The war can still be ours." Müller sealed the letter. He would be dead by August 10th, killed by a tank shell near Harbonnières. His letter would reach his widow in September, by which time the German army would be in full retreat and the Kaiser's government would be drafting armistice terms. But in mid-June, Wilhelm Müller's assessment seemed reasonable to thousands of German officers. They had won the war in the east. They had launched 5 massive offensives in the west since March, recapturing in weeks territory that had cost the Allies years of blood. They had pushed to within 60 kilometers of Paris. The Americans might be numerous, but what did numbers matter against German professionalism, German discipline, the genius of German staff work? What the Germans did not see, what they could not see from their perspective of tactical success and operational exhaustion, was that their spring offensives had won ground but lost the war. The March 21st offensive, Operation Michael, had advanced 60 kilometers in 3 weeks, the greatest territorial gain on the Western Front since 1914. It had also cost the German army 240,000 casualties, including thousands of irreplaceable stormtroopers, the assault specialists who spearheaded attacks. The April and May offensives had similar results: impressive penetrations, enormous losses, no strategic breakthrough. By June, the German army had shot its bolt. Front-line divisions stood at 50% strength. Replacements consisted of barely trained teenagers and men previously deemed unfit for combat. Horses starved. Trucks lacked fuel. The British naval blockade, tightening for 4 years, had reduced Germany to near starvation. Civilian rations in Berlin provided 1,200 calories per day. Soldiers at the front received little better. Meanwhile, the Allies grew stronger by the hour. American troops disembarked in French ports at a rate of 10,000 men per day. In June alone, 278,000 American soldiers arrived in France. They brought with them the industrial might of a continent untouched by war. Artillery shells by the millions, trucks by the thousands, fresh horses, aviation fuel, tinned beef, chocolate, cigarettes, hope. The British and French armies, bled white by 4 years of attrition, had learned terrible lessons and forged them into doctrine. The British had created the tank corps, refining the ungainly machines of 1916 into swift cavalry substitutes. The French had perfected artillery tactics, using creeping barrages and counter-battery fire with scientific precision. The Australians and Canadians, drawn from societies 10,000 miles from Europe, fought with a pragmatic ferocity that unnerved German veterans. And now, in early July 1918, these forces prepared to transition from defense to offense under a unified command structure that had eluded the Allies for 4 years. Marshal Ferdinand Foch, the French general appointed Supreme Allied Commander in April, was 66 years old, a devout Catholic and former artillery instructor with a reputation for aggressive optimism that bordered on mania. His colleagues called him a dreamer. His critics called him reckless. In the summer of 1918, he would prove to be exactly what the Allies needed. A commander willing to attack everywhere, always, giving the Germans no time to rest, no space to consolidate, no hope of stabilization. Foch's strategic vision was brutally simple. The German army had overextended itself. Its supply lines stretched across devastated countryside. Its reserves were exhausted. Its morale, sustained for 4 years by belief in ultimate victory, had begun to crack. "Attack now," Foch insisted. "Attack hard, attack continuously, give them no respite, break them." The British sector opposite Amiens offered the perfect location for Foch's first major counterstroke. The German spring offensives had created a bulge in the Allied line southeast of the town, threatening the crucial rail junction that connected British and French supply networks. Eliminating this bulge would secure Allied logistics and, more importantly, demonstrate that the initiative had shifted. General Douglas Haig, commanding British forces, assigned the operation to the 4th Army under General Henry Rawlinson. Rawlinson was 54, a careful planner who had learned from the Somme disaster of 1916 that attacks required meticulous preparation. Artillery superiority, tactical surprise, combined arms, coordination. He would have all three at Amiens. The plan germinated in secrecy throughout July. Rawlinson assembled a strike force that represented the best of 4 nations. The Canadian Corps, 4 divisions of the toughest soldiers in the British Empire, would form the Northern Hammer. The Australian Corps, equally formidable, would strike in the centre. French divisions would attack on the southern flank. British divisions would provide support and exploitation forces. Together they would deploy 414 tanks, the largest concentration of armoured vehicles ever committed to battle. They would enjoy support from 1,800 aircraft, giving them absolute air superiority over the battlefield. And they would do all this without alerting the Germans. Secrecy became obsession. Canadian soldiers travelled to the front in small groups, dispersed among other units. Their distinctive shoulder patches were forbidden. 2 Canadian casualty clearing stations opened ostentatiously near Ypres, 200 kilometres north, to suggest an offensive there. Radio operators transmitted false messages. Dummy artillery positions sprouted behind quiet sectors. Real guns moved into position at night, their wheels wrapped in burlap to muffle sound, their positions camouflaged before dawn. Troops assembled in woods and valleys hidden from German observation. Staff officers preparing attack plans worked in locked rooms and slept beside their documents. The entire 4th Army, numbering more than 400,000 men, crept into position like a cat stalking a bird. In the German lines opposite, exhausted soldiers noticed nothing unusual. The sector seemed quiet, almost restful compared to the maelstrom of the spring offensives. The German Second Army held the position with depleted divisions, many pulled from other fronts for rest and refitting. They had grown accustomed to Allied timidity, to ponderous attacks telegraphed days in advance by week-long bombardments. The British had not launched a major offensive since November 1917. Why would they start now, in August, when the fighting season neared its end? On August 7th, the day before the attack, a German listening post intercepted a fragment of a Canadian radio transmission. The message meant nothing on its own, just routine chatter, but its point of origin suggested Canadian presence in the sector. The intelligence officer who received the report dutifully forwarded it to division headquarters. It arrived at 6:30 in the evening. The division commander read it at 7:15. He considered sending out a patrol to investigate. Then he reconsidered. His men were tired. Tomorrow would be soon enough. He filed the report and went to dinner. At 4:20 on the morning of August 8th, Henry Dubois turned his milk cart toward home, his deliveries complete. The fog had thickened into a grey wool blanket that reduced visibility to 30 meters. He wondered if it would burn off by midday. Then the horizon lit up like 100 suns had risen simultaneously, and the sound hit him a half-second later, a rolling thunder that seemed to come from the earth itself, and Henri Dubois pulled his cart to the side of the road and stared east toward a sky turning orange with fire. 4:35 in the morning. 2,000 guns fire at once. The barrage is not like previous bombardments. There has been no days-long preliminary shelling to pulverize enemy positions and warn of coming attack. This is a hurricane barrage, concentrated and brief, designed to stun rather than destroy. High explosive shells, tear gaps in German wire. Gas shells saturate known headquarters, locations, and battery positions. Smoke shells blind observation posts. Counter-battery fire, directed by aerial reconnaissance and sound ranging, strikes every known German artillery position simultaneously. Within minutes, German communications collapse. Telephone lines shatter. Runners cannot navigate the chaos. Company commanders lose contact with battalion. Battalion loses contact with division. The entire German command structure, already fragile from months of attrition, disintegrates. At precisely 5:20, exactly 100 minutes before dawn, the barrage shifts forward. The tanks roll. They emerge from the fog like iron ghosts, 414 Mark V and Whippet tanks, the largest armoured force assembled to date. The Mark V's weigh 29 tons each, carry crews of 8 men, and mount either 2 6-pounder guns or 5 machine guns. They travel at a maximum speed of 8 kilometers per hour, slower than walking pace, but nothing in the German forward positions can stop them. Machine gun bullets ricochet off armor. Rifle fire is useless. The tanks crush barbed wire under their treads, flatten trenches, destroy machine gun nests. Behind them, waves of infantry advance. The Canadian Corps strikes first. The 1st Canadian Division hits the German line at the Amiens-Roye Road. The 58th Division, a German unit pulled from quiet duty for rest, evaporates. Some Germans surrender immediately, others flee. A few fight back with rifles and grenades, achieving nothing. The Canadians advance 3 kilometers in the first hour. The 2nd Canadian Division takes Marcel Cave. The 3rd Canadian Division captures Hangard Wood. The 4th Canadian Division pushes beyond Auge. German defensive positions, prepared over months, become irrelevant. There is no time to coordinate resistance. Units caught in forward positions are bypassed and captured. Units in reserve positions find themselves under attack before they comprehend what is happening. Lieutenant Hans Krieger of the 58th Division survives the initial barrage in a command bunker near Villa-Bretonneux. He emerges at 5:45 to find his world transformed into nightmare. The fog swirls with shapes. Engines growl. Men scream. He sees a tank materialize from the grey, its guns swiveling. He dives back into the bunker. The tank passes overhead. Timbers crack. Earth cascades through widening gaps in the ceiling. Kaiser and 4 soldiers scramble out the rear entrance and run east, away from the guns, away from the tanks, away from an army that seems to have sprung from nowhere. They run for 6 kilometers before finding a German officer organizing a scratched defensive line. The officer asks Kaiser to report on his unit's position. Kaiser laughs, a high, brittle sound. "My unit no longer exists," he says. "Nothing exists. They have broken through everything." The Australian Corps attacks south of the Canadians with equal violence. The 2nd Australian Division takes Wharfesay in 40 minutes. The 3rd Australian Division captures Morcourt. The 4th Australian Division punches through to Harbonnières by noon, advancing 11 kilometres, deeper than any Allied penetration since trench warfare began. The Australians fight with coordinated fury, infantry and tanks working in practiced harmony. Tank commanders spot targets and radio artillery observers. Artillery shells clear strong points. Infantry mop up survivors and push forward. German machine gunners, the backbone of defensive warfare for 4 years, find themselves outmatched. They can kill infantrymen, but they cannot stop tanks, and infantry supported by tanks quickly flanks and destroys exposed machine gun positions. The French First Army joins the attack on the southern flank, pushing forward in pace with the Commonwealth forces. Coordination between 3 armies, difficult under the best circumstances, unfolds with remarkable precision. The artillery barrage rolls forward at predetermined times. Tanks reach phase lines on schedule. Infantry battalions maintain alignment. Casualties remain astonishingly light. The entire offensive operates like a machine, each part meshing with the others, the product of 4 years of bloody lessons finally mastered. By mid-morning, German command recognizes catastrophe. Desperate orders go out. Counterattack, hold the line, stop the breakthrough. But counterattack requires reserves, and the reserves are too distant or too disorganized to intervene. Units ordered forward get lost in fog, stumble into Allied advance guards, or find the positions they were meant to relieve already overrun. The Second Army commander, General Georg von der Marwitz, telephones Corps headquarters at 9:30 and reports, "The situation is serious. The enemy has broken through on a wide front. I have no reserves." He does not mention that he has also lost contact with half his divisions. The German Air Force, the vaunted Luftwaffe, cannot intervene. Allied fighters swarm over the battlefield in unprecedented numbers. British Sopwith Camels and SE-5S, French Spads, even American Nieuports hunt German reconnaissance planes and bombers. Allied bombers strafe German troop columns and supply convoys. One pilot, Captain Roy Brown of the Royal Air Force, later describes the scene. "You could see them streaming back for miles. Guns, transport, everything mixed up together. We flew low and shot up anything that moved. I felt almost sorry for them. They had no chance." By early afternoon, the breakthrough achieves dimensions unimaginable in earlier years of the war. The Canadians have advanced 12 kilometers. The Australians, in some sectors, have pushed 15 kilometers beyond their start lines. Entire German divisions have ceased to exist as coherent fighting forces. Prisoners flood rearward in thousands. Allied cavalry, unused since 1914, gallops forward to exploit the gap, though German machine gunners and remnant artillery still make old-fashioned charges suicidal. The objective is not cavalry glory but pursuit, maintaining pressure, preventing the Germans from establishing new defensive lines, keeping them off balance and retreating. Rawlinson's headquarters receives reports throughout the day with mounting excitement. At 1000 hours, all objectives taken, light casualties, advancing beyond planned phase lines. At 1300 hours, prisoners exceed 10,000, numbers still rising. At 1600 hours, some units report lack of opposition, Germans in full retreat. Staff officers update maps with disbelief. One colonel, veteran of the Somme slaughter, stares at the situation board and mutters, "My God, we are through. We are actually through." They are not quite through. The advance slows as the day wears on. Tanks break down or run out of fuel. Infantry formations lose cohesion in rapid advance. Supply lines stretch thin. German resistance stiffens as fresh divisions rush to plug the gap. By evening, the Allied forces consolidate positions, digging in against expected counterattacks. But the damage to German forces is catastrophic and irreversible. The Second Army has lost more than 30,000 men, including 15,000 prisoners. Allied casualties total fewer than 9,000, an exchange ratio unprecedented in Great War combat. More importantly, German morale, brittle before the attack, shatters completely. That night, all along the German line, soldiers ask the same questions. If we can be defeated this badly here, can we hold anywhere? If the Allies can attack like this at Amiens, what stops them from attacking like this everywhere? The answers terrify them. In Spa, Belgium, at the German Supreme Headquarters, staff officers compile reports from the Second Army sector. The news worsens with each incoming message. Around 2200 hours, the reports reach General Erich Ludendorff. He is 53 years old, a Prussian officer of legendary efficiency, architect of Germany's eastern victories, master of the spring offensives. He reads the dispatches in silence, then he reads them again. His adjutant later recalls that Ludendorff's face turned grey. August 8th, Ludendorff says quietly, is the black day of the German army in the history of this war. He means the numbers, the unprecedented losses, the collapsed divisions, the thousands of prisoners taken in a single day. But he means something deeper. He means the realization, suddenly unavoidable, that Germany cannot win. The spring offensives, meant to force Allied surrender before American strength became overwhelming, have failed. The Allies have not only stopped German attacks but reversed them with terrifying efficiency. Fresh American divisions arrive daily. British and French armies, supposedly exhausted, have demonstrated vigor and tactical sophistication that exceeds anything the Germans can muster. And now, at Amiens, the Allies have revealed that they can orchestrate combined arms offensives with a perfection the Germans cannot match or counter. "We must make peace," Ludendorff tells his staff. "We cannot sustain this. We must seek terms before the army disintegrates completely." The words hang in the room like smoke. Nobody speaks. The architect of German victory has just admitted defeat. The war will continue for 94 more days. Hundreds of thousands of men will die in those 3 months. But August 8th, 1918, is the moment when everyone who matters knows the outcome. The Battle of Amiens officially concludes on August 12th, 1918, after 4 days of fighting. The Allies have advanced up to 20 kilometers on a 30-kilometer front, taken 30,000 German prisoners and 400 guns, and destroyed or mauled 16 German divisions. British Empire forces have suffered 18,000 casualties. French forces have lost 8,000 men. The exchange rate, measured in blood and morale, favours the Allies by margins inconceivable in earlier battles. But Amiens is not the end. It is the beginning. Foch, sensing weakness, orders continuous attacks all along the Western Front. If the Germans are shaken at Amiens, strike them everywhere else while they reel. On August 21st, the British Third Army attacks near Albert. On August 26th, the British First Army attacks near Arras. On September 12th, the Americans launch their first independent offensive at Saint-Mihiel. On September 26th, The Americans and French attack in the Meuse-Argonne, while British forces assault the Hindenburg Line. Each offensive is a hammer blow. Each hammer blow drives the Germans farther back. Each retreat erodes morale, consumes reserves, and narrows options. The strategy is not subtle. It is not elegant. It is industrial attrition on a scale that transforms strategic thinking forever. Foch does not seek clever flanking maneuvers or brilliant encirclements. He seeks to smash the German army through relentless pressure applied simultaneously at multiple points, preventing any possibility of recovery or consolidation. He has the resources for this approach: millions of fresh soldiers, thousands of tanks and aircraft, industrial production that dwarfs German capacity. He has the will. 4 years of German occupation have left him with no sympathy for measured approaches. And he has time. Every week, more Americans arrive. Every week, the British blockade tightens. Every week, Germany grows weaker. The German army retreats but does not collapse. Professional units conduct skilled defensive battles, trading space for time, inflicting casualties on Allied forces. But the retreats accumulate. Territory won in the spring offensives is abandoned in weeks. The Hindenburg Line, the fortified defensive system Germany spent 2 years constructing, is breached in September. By October, German forces withdraw toward the Belgian border. By November, they abandon Belgium altogether. The retreat becomes a rout in places. Entire divisions surrender. Others disintegrate through desertion. German soldiers, told for 4 years that victory was certain, that Allied forces were brittle, that one more push would end the war, realize they have been lied to. The lies breed bitterness. The bitterness breeds mutiny. On October 29th, the German High Seas Fleet receives orders to sortie for a final battle against the Royal Navy. The sailors, who have spent 4 years blockaded in port, refuse. Mutiny spreads from Kiel to Hamburg to Munich. Workers strike in industrial cities. The Kaiser's government, already negotiating armistice terms with President Wilson, loses control of the home front. On November 7th, a revolution erupts in Munich. On November 9th, the Kaiser abdicates and flees to Holland. On November 11, at 1100 hours, the armistice takes effect. Silence falls across the Western Front. In a field hospital near Amiens, a Canadian private named Robert Fraser lies recovering from wounds received on August 8th. He had advanced 15 kilometers that day, farther than he had moved in 2 years of trench warfare. A shell fragment had caught him in the afternoon, ending his war but sparing his life. Now, as church bells ring in distant towns to mark the armistice, Fraser listens to the silence. A nurse asks what he is thinking. "I am thinking," he says slowly, "that I was there when it turned. I was there on the day when we went from dying in place to moving forward, when we went from losing to winning. August 8th. I will remember that date for the rest of my life." He will live until 1976, dying at 82 in a suburb of Toronto, surrounded by grandchildren who cannot fully comprehend what he survived. But to his final day, he will mark August 8th with quiet remembrance, lighting a candle for the friends who did not return, for the Germans he killed, for the strange mechanical dawn when tanks materialized from fog and the Great War entered its final act. 20 years after Amiens, in 1938, a British military theorist named Basil Liddell Hart publishes a history of the Great War. He devotes 3 chapters to the 100 Days Offensive and identifies August 8, 1918, as the true turning point of 20th century warfare. Not the Somme, with its futile slaughter, not Verdun, with its attritional horror, not Passchendaele, with its drowning mud. Amiens, the battle that demonstrated how modern combined arms warfare should function. Coordinated artillery, massed armor, air superiority, tactical surprise, operational tempo. The battle that broke the unbreakable German army. Liddell Hart interviews surviving participants. A German veteran tells him, We knew after Amiens that we had lost. Oh, we fought for 3 more months. But it was theatre, playing out a script whose ending was already written. The surprise, the tanks, the perfect coordination, it was too much. We could not match it. We could not even imagine how to match it. A British tank commander describes the sensation of breakthrough. For 4 years we had bashed our heads against brick walls. Suddenly the wall was not there. You rolled forward and nobody stopped you. It was intoxicating and terrifying. You kept expecting the trap to spring, the counterattack to hit, the machine guns to open up. But they did not come. They were beaten. We had won. Liddell Hart notes that the lessons of Amiens shaped military doctrine worldwide. The Germans studied the battle intensively during the interwar period, developing the blitzkrieg tactics that would shock Europe in 1940. Tanks massed for breakthrough, infantry following in motorized transport, airpower isolating the battlefield. The British and French, paradoxically, learned the wrong lessons, fixating on static defense and underestimating the potential of armored warfare. The Americans, arriving late to the Great War, absorbed both the tactical success of Amiens and the strategic exhaustion it represented, building an army that could wage industrial warfare on continental scales. In Germany, the memory of August 8th grows more bitter with time. Ludendorff, cashiered after the war and embroiled in right-wing politics, writes memoirs blaming everyone but himself for defeat. The socialists, the Jews, the politicians who stabbed the army in the back. The Black Day becomes evidence of betrayal rather than military reality. This narrative, toxic and false, feeds the resentments that will enable Hitler's rise. The lesson of Amiens, that even excellent armies can be defeated when overextended and outnumbered, is forgotten in favor of myths about invincible German warriors undermined by cowards at home. The veterans know better. An Australian corporal, interviewed in 1963, recalls August 8th with clarity undimmed by 45 years. The Jerrys fought hard all through the war, no question. Brave men, good soldiers. But that morning, when the fog lifted and they saw us coming with the tanks, you could see something break in them. Not cowardice, just realization. They understood they could not win. That is what made it the Black Day. Not the casualties or the lost ground, but the broken faith. They had believed in victory, and on August 8th they stopped believing. By the 1980s, the last survivors are dying. Historians comb archives for documents, diaries, letters. The battle receives academic attention as a case study in operational art, in combined arms coordination, in the transition from position warfare to maneuver warfare. Military colleges from Sandhurst to West Point teach Amiens as an example of successful offensive planning. Staff officers study Rawlinson's deception measures, his logistical preparations, his timing. The battle becomes doctrine. But the human dimension fades. The fog, the terror, the confusion, the sudden comprehension that everything has changed becomes dry text in military manuals. The names of small French villages where thousands died become map coordinates. The milk cart driver, the frightened lieutenant, the wounded Canadian, they become statistics if they are remembered at all. In Amiens itself, the war leaves scars that never fully heal. The city, shelled sporadically for 4 years, carries architectural wounds, rebuilt squares that do not quite match their pre-war proportions, churches with mismatched stonework, gaps in street facades where houses never returned. A memorial stands near Villers-Bretonneux, a white tower visible for kilometres, dedicated to Australian soldiers with no known graves. The names inscribed on the memorial include men who died on August 8, 1918, advancing into fog and gunfire to win a battle that changed history. Every August 8th, until the last veterans die, and then for decades after, small ceremonies occur at the memorial. Descendants lay wreaths. Buglers play the last post. Politicians give speeches about sacrifice and remembrance. The ceremonies grow smaller as years pass, as memory fades, As the Great War recedes into history's background noise, one catastrophe among many, relevant mainly to specialists and the elderly. What persists is the transformation. On August 7th, 1918, the war seemed endless, a grinding stalemate that might exhaust all sides into negotiated peace. On August 8th, the illusion shattered. The Germans discovered they could be beaten decisively. The Allies discovered they could win cleanly. The balance tipped, momentum shifted, and the outcome became inevitable. 94 days remained before the armistice, 94 days of fighting and dying, but August 8th was the day the Great War ended in all but name. Ludendorff was right to call it a black day. Not just for Germany, though the immediate tactical disaster justified the term. A black day for the illusions that had sustained 4 years of slaughter. The illusion that courage and discipline could overcome industrial might. That morale compensated for material deficiency, that will alone determined victory. Amiens proved that modern war was mathematical, that production capacity and logistical sophistication mattered more than fighting spirit, that armies could not wish themselves to victory against opponents who had mastered the grim arithmetic of mechanized combat. This lesson, learned at such terrible cost on the Western Front, would be forgotten and relearned repeatedly throughout the 20th century. But on August 8, 1918, as Henry Dubois stood beside his milk cart watching the eastern sky burn orange with artillery fire, as Wilhelm Müller died under a tank's treads near Harbonnières, as Robert Fraser advanced into history and Hans Krieger fled toward Germany, the modern age of warfare was born. Total war. Industrial war. War that could be won only by nations that could mobilize every resource, coordinate every weapon, sustain every offensive until the enemy broke. The Black Day. The turning point. The beginning of the end. A date that should live in memory alongside the great battles of history, not for glory or heroism, though both were present, but as warning and instruction, as evidence that even the mightiest armies can collapse when assumptions prove false, as proof that victory belongs not to the bravest but to the best prepared, as testament to the men who fought and died on both sides of a conflict whose futility and necessity remain debated a century later. The fog lifted by midday on August 8, 1918. The view it revealed changed everything. The rest, as they say, was epilogue.